Stop. Don't scroll. Not yet. Because something in you already knows this isn't just another message passing through your screen. There is a reason your attention paused here, a reason your chest feels tight, a reason this moment feels heavier than it should. Perhaps you are here for a reason, and this moment may be worth your attention. And what you are about to hear may be something you should not brush aside too quickly. Right now, you may be closer to an important turning point than you realize. Everything may look fine on the surface, but beneath it, something is shifting, quietly, steadily, and if you ignore it, it will not wait for you to catch up. Most people will miss this moment. They will scroll, dismiss, rationalize, and move on, never realizing how close they were to clarity, or how close they were to losing something they cannot replace. But you didn't scroll. You stayed. And that matters more than you think. Because this isn't just a message, it's an interruption, a warning, a narrow window opening before it quietly closes. And once a moment passes, it may not return in quite the same way again. I'm telling you this now because truth spoken early can still protect what has not yet been lost. This is not about fear, it's about awareness. There are moments in life when everything still looks stable, yet something deeper has already begun to shift. Scripture says, "Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil." Ephesians 5:15-16. This is one of those moments, a quiet turning point, a narrowing space where delay no longer stays harmless. If something in you is stirring as you listen, don't ignore it. Stay with this message a little longer. Sometimes the clarity you've been searching for begins in moments like this. There is a pattern you must recognize. What you repeat in private becomes the path you walk in public. The small decisions you overlook are not small at all. They are directions. And direction, over time, becomes destiny. Think of Samson, who did not fall in a single moment of weakness, but through a series of compromises he convinced himself were manageable. By the time he realized what was slipping away, the strength he once carried had already left him. That is why this feels personal. Because it is. Not everyone will hear this the same way, and not everyone is meant to. But you can feel it, something pressing, something asking for your attention, something refusing to be ignored. This is what it feels like when truth steps closer. There are things you have been postponing, telling yourself you'll face them when the timing feels right. There are quiet choices you've justified, habits you've renamed, signals you've silenced because responding would disrupt your comfort. But let this be clear. Delay does not preserve peace. It quietly reshapes your future. And the longer something is ignored, the louder its consequences eventually become. Time does not always announce when it begins to close a door. It simply becomes less forgiving. What once waited for you begins to move without you. What once felt optional becomes necessary. This is not pressure, it is clarity. And clarity is a gift, even when it confronts you. Because moments like this do not come often. And when they do, they carry weight. Not to overwhelm you, but to wake you. You've been telling yourself there's still room to wait, that nothing truly demands your attention yet, that you'll face it when life slows down, when you feel stronger, when everything aligns. But Scripture warns, do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring. Proverbs 27:1. What you call later is not a promise, it's an assumption. And comfort, no matter how familiar it feels, is not the same as being secure. Because the most dangerous drift doesn't come with noise. It doesn't announce itself with chaos. It comes quietly, like the story of the 10 virgins in Matthew 25. Some were ready, some were not. And the difference was not obvious until the door was suddenly closed. That is how loss often works. Not in a single moment, but in a slow fading. A dimming of clarity. A weakening of conviction. A quiet distance where there was once closeness. What you are at risk of losing may not even have a name yet. It hides beneath the surface, your peace, your sharpness, your sense of direction, your ability to discern what truly matters. These things don't disappear all at once. They erode, subtly, patiently, and most people only recognize it when something feels off. But by then, much has already slipped away. And I know you're tired. Tired of carrying weight you don't always speak about. Tired of thinking deeply, of feeling intensely, of constantly being aware. It would be easier to push this aside, to distract yourself, to promise you'll come back to it later. But listen carefully. Avoidance does not restore you. It only delays what must eventually be faced. True rest is not found in escape, it's found in realignment. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28. Rest comes when you stop running from what matters and begin stepping toward it, even if slowly, even if imperfectly. And if this feels intense, if it feels sharper than you expected, there is a reason. When something important is at stake, love does not stay quiet. When a turning point approaches, truth does not soften itself to remain comfortable. It becomes clear, direct, impossible to ignore. Because sometimes the greatest act of care is not soothing your present, but protecting your future. You've asked for direction, you've waited for clarity, you've searched for a sign that would finally make things unmistakable. But what happens when the answer arrives in a form you didn't expect? Too often, people pray for guidance, yet hesitate when it comes plainly. As it is written, "Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts." Hebrews 3:15. This is not confusion, this is clarity. Not coincidence, alignment. This moment is not meant to be analyzed endlessly. It is meant to be answered, because there are patterns that must end, steps that must begin, and weights that must be released without delay. What feels small today can shape everything tomorrow. A habit ignored becomes a chain. A hesitation repeated becomes a direction. And over time, direction becomes a life you did not intend to live. Think of Jonah, who delayed what he knew he was called to do. The longer he resisted, the more complicated the path became. Delay did not remove the calling, it only made the journey harder. The same is true here. What you sense now will not disappear. It will either be faced in wisdom or revisited through consequence. You may feel a rising tension inside, not panic, but awareness. That awareness is not meant to freeze you, it is meant to focus you, because you still have the ability to respond, to shift, to choose differently while it still matters. Not everyone will respond to this moment, but you still can. Stay here for a moment longer. Don't rush past what you feel. Don't let distraction pull you away just when something important is becoming clear. Because this is not a random pause in your attention, it is a moment that carries weight. A moment that reaches deeper than surface emotion, touching something that has been quietly waiting for you to notice. What you do with this right now will not stay in this moment. It will move forward with you, shaping what comes next in ways you may not yet understand. Scripture reminds us, now is the time of God's favor. Now is the day of salvation. 2 Corinthians 6:2. Not later. Not when everything feels easier. Now. There is a reason this feels urgent, even if nothing around you appears to be collapsing. Because urgency is not always tied to visible crisis. It is often tied to unseen change. The space you once had to delay, to pause, to remain undecided without consequence, is beginning to narrow, quietly, gradually. What once waited for you is no longer standing still. Opportunities that lingered are beginning to move. Doors that once stayed open without effort are starting to close without announcement. And like Esther, standing at a decisive moment, you are faced with something that cannot be postponed indefinitely. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Esther 4:14. Something has shifted, even if you cannot fully explain it yet. The things you once ignored now carry weight. The things you once delayed now carry consequence. What used to feel optional is becoming necessary. What used to feel distant is now close. Time has not stopped, but it has changed its posture toward you, and if you are honest, You can feel it. A subtle pressure, a quiet knowing that standing still is no longer safe in the way it once was. There was a season when hesitation was absorbed by grace, when indecision did not immediately cost you, when you could afford to wait and still remain where you were. But that season is fading, not because grace has disappeared, but because what lies ahead requires something more from you: clarity, alignment, and response. Even Jesus spoke of moments like this when he said, "Work while it is day, night is coming, when no one can work." John 9-4. There are windows of time that carry opportunity, and those windows do not remain open forever. This is why you cannot treat this moment lightly, not because you are being forced, but because you are being invited, and invitations, when ignored, do not always return in the same form. Life will not pause while you gather certainty. It will not slow down while you wait to feel ready. It will not adjust itself to match hesitation if you choose comfort over movement. What is ahead will continue forward, with or without your response. You are not being asked to have everything figured out. You are not being asked to move perfectly, but you are being asked to move. Because from this point forward, every choice carries more weight than before. Every delay has more impact. Every decision shapes more than just the present. It shapes direction. And direction, once set, is not easily undone. This is not pressure. It is clarity, arriving at the moment you need it most. Because standing still is no longer neutral, and you already know it. From where you stand, it may be hard to see where hesitation can quietly lead. I see where silence slowly pulls you. I see what happens when warnings are brushed aside, when truth is labeled as exaggeration just to keep things comfortable. That is why this moment had to interrupt you, not to disturb you without reason, but to reach you before what is forming becomes unavoidable. Because grace often arrives as interruption before it ever appears as restoration. This is not random. It is not chance. It is not just another piece of content passing through your day. Scripture says, "The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord." Psalm 37-23. Moments like this can feel deeply meaningful, as though they arrive for a reason. You are not here because you are different from everyone else, but because you did not turn away when something inside you recognized wait. You paused. You listened. And that alone sets this moment apart. Many encountered the same opportunity and moved past it without a second thought. They felt the same subtle pull and dismissed it. They sensed something deeper but chose noise over stillness, distraction over reflection. But you stayed. And that matters more than you realize, because staying is often the first step towards seeing clearly. Do not mistake this moment as something light. Mercy does not always come quietly. Sometimes it interrupts. Sometimes it challenges. Sometimes it refuses to be ignored because what is at stake is too important to approach gently. Like when Nathan confronted David not to condemn him, but to awaken him before the weight of his choices went further than it needed to. Mercy speaks up when silence would cost too much. And understand this: ignoring what you now see does not remove its impact. It only postpones your awareness of it. Distraction cannot erase direction. Delay cannot cancel outcome. What is already unfolding may continue, whether you pay attention to it or not. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Galatians 6-7. What you do with this moment matters. Even if you try to move on and forget, something in you will remember. Because truth, once seen, does not disappear. It waits. And when it returns, it often does so with greater weight than before. You once believed that staying silent would keep things stable, that avoiding hard decisions would somehow preserve peace. It felt safer not to confront, not to choose, not to step forward. But there comes a point where silence is no longer protection, it becomes permission. What is left unaddressed does not disappear, it grows. And what you continue to avoid will not stay quiet forever. It will return, stronger, clearer, and far less negotiable. Scripture makes this plain. Whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him It is sin, James 4:17. There is a responsibility that comes with awareness. Once you see, once you understand, neutrality is no longer an option. What you do not confront will begin to shape you. What you do not correct will begin to define you. And I know how easy it would be to turn away right now, to minimize what you're hearing, to tell yourself this is too intense, too heavy, too much for this moment. The mind always looks for escape when truth presses in. It searches for distraction, for comfort, for anything that allows you to delay without feeling guilty. But hear this clearly. Stepping away is not passive. Ignoring is not neutral. Delay is not harmless. Each one is a decision, and every decision moves you somewhere. Because moments like this are not places where you can stand still. You are already in motion, whether you realize it or not. Every shift in attention, every response, every hesitation is carrying you in a direction. As it is written, I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore choose life. Deuteronomy 30:19. The choice is not distant, it is present. It is immediate. Right now, you are standing at a narrowing point. Two paths may be in front of you now, but opportunities do not always remain equally open forever. One leads toward clarity, alignment, and a life that strengthens over time. The other leads quietly, almost unnoticed at first, into confusion, compromise, and a kind of loss that reveals itself too late to easily reverse. This is not exaggeration, it is perspective, one you may not yet fully see, but one that is already unfolding. And that is why this moment cannot be softened. Not because it lacks care, but because it carries too much of it. You've been telling yourself there's still time, that you'll deal with it when things calm down, when you feel stronger, when clarity comes easier. But later has quietly become a risk. Because what you delay does not stay still. It shifts, it accumulates, and often it takes more than you realize before you notice what's missing. As Scripture warns, catch for us the foxes, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards. Song of Songs 2:15. It is rarely the obvious things that undo us. It is the small, unnoticed ones. What has been slipping is not loud enough to alarm you, but it is real. Focus fades, peace becomes fragile, discernment dulls. The hunger for what is true begins to weaken, not suddenly but gradually, almost imperceptibly. And that is why this moment matters, because awareness now can still restore what has not yet been completely lost. This is not meant to overwhelm you, it is meant to reach you while there is still space to respond. Because mercy does not only comfort, it also warns. It steps in before confusion deepens. It speaks before the noise becomes too loud to hear clearly. And Scripture reminds us, the Lord disciplines the one he loves, Hebrews 12:6, not to harm but to protect. You are not being singled out to be afraid, you are being given a chance to see clearly. There are pressures around you you may not have fully recognized, patterns that are trying to return, habits that quietly pull you backward. And the greatest risk is not sudden failure, it is slow drift, the kind that feels manageable until it has already taken more than you intended to give. That is why distraction matters more than it seems. That is why delay is not harmless. Because moments like this are not endless. When important truths are ignored, they often return later with greater weight, sometimes after consequences have already grown. You may feel resistance rising even now, doubt, discomfort, a desire to step away. That does not mean this moment is misplaced. It often means something important is being challenged. Because not everything that feels familiar is safe. Not everything that feels calm is truly secure. There is a way that appears to be right, but in the end, it leads to death. Proverbs 14:12. So listen closely. What you choose after this matters more than it seems. Not in dramatic ways at first, but in direction. Because direction shapes outcome. Small alignment now can prevent greater loss later. Small attention now can guard you from deeper regret. You are not being asked to be perfect. You are being asked to respond. Because the space for indifference is closing, the margin for delay is shrinking, and this moment right here is where change is still gentle. What you are facing is not loud, not obvious, not immediate. That is why it is easy to miss. You are not standing at the edge of visible collapse. You are standing in something far more subtle, a quiet erosion. The kind that happens when awareness fades, when vigilance softens, when discernment slowly loses its sharpness. And that is exactly where the deeper danger begins to take shape. This is not about something visibly breaking in your life. It's deeper than that, more subtle, more dangerous. It's the quiet weakening of what's inside you, the place where clarity once lived, where conviction once spoke clearly, where you once responded without hesitation. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Proverbs 4:23. And yet, the heart is exactly where this erosion begins. You wake up, you function, you meet expectations, and from the outside, everything appears stable. But stability without alignment is fragile. Comfort without truth is misleading. There is a kind of peace that exists only because nothing is being challenged, and that kind of peace slowly costs you more than you realize. Because what you're facing does not arrive loudly. It settles in quietly. It whispers, "You're fine," even as something essential is fading. This is how decline begins, not through sudden collapse, but through gradual drift. Like the church in Ephesus, who were doing all the right things yet were warned, "You have forsaken the love you had at first." Revelation 2-4. Everything looked intact, but something vital had already been lost. And that is the danger, losing what matters most, while everything still appears under control. You've grown used to patterns that once felt temporary, the same routines, the same distractions, the same ways of avoiding discomfort. What once would have stirred conviction now barely moves you. What once required immediate response now gets postponed, not because you intend to fall, but because fatigue has made passivity feel acceptable. And that is where the real risk lies. Because loss rarely happens all at once. It happens quietly, piece by piece. A little less sensitivity, a little less focus, a little less urgency, until one day you realize something is missing, but you can't pinpoint when it began. You no longer sense what you once did. What used to feel clearly wrong now feels negotiable. What used to prompt action now invites delay. This is not growth, it is drift. So, if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. 1 Corinthians 10:12. Because the most dangerous position is not weakness, it is thinking you are fine while slowly moving off course. And it doesn't stop there. What happens within begins to affect everything around you. Emotionally, you start managing pain instead of healing it. You stay busy, distracted, occupied, but unresolved things remain. They surface in your reactions, your relationships, your decisions. You respond less with clarity and more with defense. You withdraw where you once engaged. You feel less where you once cared deeply. Relationally, a false peace begins to take over. You avoid difficult conversations. You choose silence over honesty. You protect comfort over truth. But what is not addressed does not stay neutral. It grows. Distance forms. Tension builds quietly. And over time, what once felt close becomes unfamiliar. And then there is something even deeper, your sense of purpose. You know there are steps you've been prompted to take, changes you've felt called toward. But delay has become a pattern. You wait for the perfect moment, the right feeling, the ideal clarity. Meanwhile, what once burned with conviction begins to dim. Vision fades, passion softens, not suddenly but slowly. Because this is how things are taken, not through force, but through neglect, not through obvious failure, but through quiet indifference. As Scripture says, we must pay the most careful attention so that we do not drift away. Hebrews 2:1. Drift does not feel dramatic. It feels normal until it has taken you somewhere you never intended to go. And that is the truth you must see. You don't have to walk away to lose ground. You only have to stop moving forward. You've learned to associate calm with safety, to believe that if nothing is breaking around you, then nothing is truly wrong. But that assumption can be dangerously misleading, because the most serious threats rarely arrive with noise. They build quietly over time, just as Scripture says, "A little sleep, a little slumber, and poverty will come on you like a thief." Proverbs 6:10-11. Not suddenly, but gradually. Not dramatically, but consistently. A life does not unravel in a single moment. It weakens through neglect. A structure does not fall because of one visible crack, but because of small fractures left unattended. And, in the same way, a soul does not lose its strength through one decision, but through many quiet compromises, each one seeming harmless on its own, yet together shaping a direction you never intended. You've adjusted to a version of life that works, but no longer fully lives. You remember, if only faintly, what it felt like to be sharp, responsive, deeply connected, fully present. But instead of questioning the distance, you adapted to it. You told yourself this is just how life becomes: more routine, less intensity, more control, less fire. But what feels like maturity can sometimes be misinterpreted drift, because the greatest danger is not always what you feel, it's what you no longer feel. Sensitivity fades, urgency softens, the willingness to act quickly becomes hesitation, the desire for truth becomes optional, and joy, once rooted deeply, begins to depend on circumstances. These things do not disappear loudly, they fade quietly while life continues as usual. This is not spoken to condemn you, but to awaken you, because you are not beyond restoration, but this may matter more than you realize. And the longer comfort remains unchallenged, the harder it becomes to recognize what is slipping. That is why this moment matters, because unchecked drift does not feel sudden when it reaches its outcome, it feels confusing. You look back and wonder how the distance grew so wide without you noticing, and the answer is always the same. It happens slowly. Do not underestimate what small neglect can do over time. You can appear stable and still be eroding. You can function well and still be drifting. You can feel calm and still be moving away from what once grounded you. As it is written, "Be alert and of sober mind." Your enemy prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. 1 Peter 5:8. Not always through force, but often through subtlety. But here is the turning point. Awareness changes everything. What is brought into light can be addressed. What is recognized can be restored. You are not without direction, and you are not without the ability to respond. But you must stop confusing stillness with strength. You must stop assuming that the absence of crisis means the presence of health, because this moment right now is where things can still be corrected, where erosion can still be reversed, where clarity can still return. So stay aware, stay attentive, do not dismiss what you are sensing, because this may be the kind of truth that reaches you while there is still time to respond. Let me speak plainly about something most people never admit. It is not that they didn't hear, it is that they refused to truly listen. Because listening requires humility, and humility costs something. God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. James 4:6. Pride builds a quiet wall inside the heart. It convinces people that warnings are for someone else, that urgency is overstated, that correction is unnecessary. It whispers, "You're fine," even when cracks have already begun to form beneath the surface. And then there is another layer, subtle but just as powerful. Not disbelief that God exists, but disbelief that He still speaks with weight, still interrupts, still calls for change. Truth becomes something to admire, not something to follow, something to quote, not something to obey. They hear your words, but they do not put them into practice. Ezekiel 33-32. And so, when truth comes with conviction instead of comfort, it feels too sharp, too demanding, and is quickly dismissed. But deeper still is fear. Because to take this seriously would mean something has to change. Something has to be released. A habit, a pattern, a relationship, a version of life that feels familiar even if it's quietly draining you. And many would rather stay in what they know than step into what they cannot control. Like the rich young ruler who walked away not because he didn't understand, but because the cost felt too high. Mark 10:21-22. Comfort becomes the strongest trap. It dulls awareness. It convinces you that as long as life is manageable, nothing needs to shift. It trains you to avoid anything that unsettles you, even if that discomfort is the very thing meant to free you. So people scroll past conviction. They silence what challenges them. They surround themselves with what agrees, not what corrects. And when truth confronts them, they reject it not because it is false, but because it disrupts what they've built. And when correction comes, something deeper resists it. Because correction requires honesty, and honesty threatens ego. So, instead of changing, people analyze, they debate. They search for flaws in the message, rather than allowing the message to search them. The way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. Proverbs 12:15. It is easier to defend a position than to surrender it. This pattern is not new. It has repeated throughout history. Warnings come, people delay, consequences follow, and regret arrives when prevention is no longer possible. For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. 1 Corinthians 1:18. Not because it lacks truth, but because it requires change. Understand this clearly. Ignoring truth does not stop what it leads to. It only delays when you recognize it. Outcomes are not cancelled by avoidance. They build quietly, steadily, layer by layer. And that is why so many are caught off guard. Because nothing seemed urgent until it was too late. Many assume they are exempt. They believe warnings are for others, for those who are visibly struggling, obviously lost. But often, the greatest risk lies with those who appear stable, functional, even successful. Because pride tells them they are secure, comfort tells them they are safe, routine tells them they are grounded. And all the while, something deeper is slowly shifting out of alignment. Others turn away because it threatens the story they've built about themselves. To listen would mean admitting that some choices were not as harmless as they believed, that some delays carried weight, that some compromises had consequences, and that realization is uncomfortable. So they protect the story at the cost of the future. Some are simply tired, not physically, but inwardly, tired of reflection, tired of being challenged, tired of being called higher. They look for rest, but they search for it in avoidance rather than surrender. They mistake numbness for peace, distance for healing. And when something calls them to wake up, it feels like a burden instead of a rescue. Others are distracted. Their attention is divided, their minds are full, their hearts are scattered. They have trained themselves to move quickly, consume, react, move on. Stillness feels uncomfortable. Depth feels demanding. And a moment like this requires both. And then there are those who fear being wrong, because to admit they should have listened sooner, acted earlier, chosen differently, it challenges how they see themselves. So they delay again, telling themselves they will deal with it later, when it feels easier, when it feels safer. But later has a way of disappearing. And that is often why people ignore what matters most, not because it is unclear, but because responding to it can feel costly. Do not measure truth by how many accept it. The crowd has never been the standard. Again and again, Scripture shows that the majority often turns away, while only a few remain willing to listen. Enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction. But small is the gate, and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Matthew 7:13-14. What is easy to follow is not always right. What is widely accepted is not always safe. There will always be voices that dismiss urgency, that downplay warnings, that choose delay because it feels more comfortable. This has always been the pattern. In the days of Noah, people continued as usual, ignoring what they did not want to believe until the moment came when it could no longer be ignored. Not because the warning was unclear, but because it was inconvenient. So this is not about looking at others. It is about your response. Because you are not being asked to judge those who turn away, you are being asked not to follow them. To see clearly where certain paths lead and choose differently while you still can. Pay attention to what tries to pull you back: pride that resists correction, comfort that avoids change, fear that clings to the familiar, and resistance that delays what should be faced now. These are not small things. They are patterns that shape direction, and direction, over time, shapes everything. Truth does not adjust itself to fit preference. It does not become softer because it is ignored. It remains steady, whether acknowledged or not. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Hebrews 13:8. What changes is not truth, but our willingness to respond to it. And this is where everything comes down to a single point. You already know enough to choose. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to take the next step. And sometimes, that step is what changes everything. If this message spoke to you in a way you didn't expect, take a quiet moment and reflect on it. And if you feel it could help someone else, consider sharing it with them, because sometimes the right message at the right time can change more than we realize.